Welcome to Tarot for the Soulless Materialist. This is episode 10, and I'm very excited to have Dr. Karen Gregory on the show today. Episode 10 is the card Wheel of Fortune. And as is customary on the show, I'm going to read from Crowley's Book of Thoth. Major Arcana 10, Fortune. This card is attributed to the planet Jupiter, quote, the greater fortune in astrology. It corresponds to the letter Kuf, which means the palm of the hand, in whose lines, according to another tradition, the fortune of the owner may be read. It would be narrow to think of Jupiter as good fortune. He represents the element of luck, the incalculable factor. This card thus represents the universe in its aspect as a continual change of state. Above the firmament of stars, these appear distorted in shape, although they are balanced, some being brilliant and some dark. From them, through the firmament, issue lightnings. They churn it into a mass of blue and violent plumes. In the midst of all this is suspended a wheel of 10 spokes, according to the number of the Sephirot and the sphere of Malkuth, indicating governance of physical affairs. On this wheel are three figures, the sordid Sphinx, Herman, Ubis, and Typhon. They symbolize the three forms of energy which govern the movement of phenomena. The nature of these qualities requires careful description. In the Hindu system are three gunas, sattvas, rajas, and tamas. The word guna is untranslatable. It is not quite an element, a quality, a form of energy, a phase, or a potential. All of these ideas enter into it. All the qualities that can be predicated of anything may be ascribed to one or more of these gunas. Tamas is darkness, inertia, sloth, ignorance, death, and the like. Rajas is energy, excitement, fire, brilliance, restlessness. Sattvas is calm, intelligence, lucidity, and balance. They correspond to the three principal Hindu castes. Now, Dr. Gregory is a great inspiration to this podcast, having done some work on tarot cards, tarot card readers, and labor. So here is the dissertation that she wrote: Enchanted Entrepreneurs, the Labor of Esoteric Practitioners in New York City. That was in 2014. In Sociology, abstract. Through participant observation and in-depth interviews, this dissertation weaves portraits of urban esoteric practitioners together with contemporary social theories of labor in order to explore the embodied and subjectifying practice of becoming a psychic or intuitive practitioner capable of offering emotional and psychological, quote, support to city dwellers. By placing this project in a larger contemporary political economic framework, this dissertation looks to explore how spirituality is, quote, entangled, Bender 2010, in both social structures and cultural practices, as well as shifting configurations of work and the nature of labor. Here we meet a network of individuals who are predominantly tarot card readers, though they also combine practices such as spiritualism, paganism, ceremonial magical practice, astrology, numerology, and Reiki into their work, who have come to study and use these cards not only as part of a personal quest for meaning or experience, but also as an attempt to make tarot, quote, work for them. This, quote, work is personal and subjective, taking the form of self-management and investing in the self, as well as social, entrepreneurial, and increasingly digital in nature. This dissertation explores the spiritualized entrepreneurial project by tracing the ways in which the shifting nature of work and labor in the United States has been experienced by individuals as both Destabilization and opportunity are what has been called precarity. In the wake of market demands for increased worker flexibility, as well as the increased privatization of risk, these esoteric practitioners have repurposed New Age practices and older metaphysical American traditions as a way of recalibrating both the self and the structure and potential of their work life. Here, links between tarot card flips, the affectivity of symbols, the desire to articulate or speak one's truth, and marketing logics are entangled and seen as sites for the possibility of enchantment, as well as sites that invoke both subtle and overt forms of labor.
I like that. Very good.
All right, so it's our great pleasure to introduce Dr. Karen Gregory. Karen, what is it about the work that you do that makes you feel good?
That's a great question, Ted. Wow. And an interesting question in these times. My work sort of spans a couple of different avenues. I started off as an ethnographer, as a graduate student in sociology. And maybe, as you know, at that time when I was a graduate student, I was working in a domestic violence hotline, going to school full time, working full time, and thinking about what my project was going to be. And as an ethnographer, I got involved with a tarot school, and I got involved by walking the streets of New York City, photographing psychic shops and tarot shops, and trying to think about these very informal points of support that people have access to. Therapy is expensive, and health insurance in America is deeply complicated and expensive. Every day I was listening to people on the telephone call up with really deep problems in their life and looking for places where people could turn to one another, forge little moments of solidarity and support, and really kind of get themselves back on track. And so there's that bit of my work, the ethnography of overlooked spaces of support and solidarity. And I've kind of brought that into my current research as well. Now I look at workers in the gig economy. What you want to talk about, though, is maybe some older gig work that goes on. And I think in terms of my research, it's that ethnographic approach. It's really trying to find smaller spaces in people's lives where people connect with themselves, but also to other people. And they find something in there. It might not be perfect political resistance. It might not be entirely alternative economies, but it's moments of hope and moments of spaces where people continue on. That work also moved me, though, a bit into digital work, digital sociology. And so I'm still an ethnographer. I hang out with people. I want to study the city, and I want to kind of walk and photograph and talk to people. But now I spend a lot more time looking at platforms and digital technologies. And, I think I'm probably dating myself when I say that I still have some hope for digital networks. That these are, we've never met, but we know each other for now, maybe going on a good 10 years.
Something like that, yep.
Yeah, right. So that's a relationship that spans multiple platforms. I watch your work on Instagram, curating esoteric art and visual materials. I know you on Twitter. I've seen you, and now of course you're developing this podcast. So I still have some optimism that we find each other, and that these are still technologies of community and connection and life, right? Life and livelihood, that goes together. So I know it's really a grim time, especially when we think about precarity and work and in the last few years of just the world. But yeah, I think it would be that. It's, the ethnographic and also thinking about these networks. I think good people still, chat.
So here on the show, Tarot for the Soulless Materialist, we do appreciate your optimism. It really is a show about work, and so
Yeah.
I'm going to be keen to hear about how your views have changed, and especially how your approach has changed, because I want to be a resource for tarot readers to think about the work that they do and sort of how to find these opportunities, how to find this community and solidarity, and figure out sort of what our next move is. So tell us a little bit about your dissertation. I've just read the abstract, so we heard about this concept of precarity. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. now going back, this is, that dissertation was written a few years ago, and it was written when I was still living in New York City, in the wake of the financial crash, global financial crash. And New York, it's an interesting place. At that point, it was really very much kind of, people were starting to call it a new New York was developing. Neighborhoods were gentrifying, and sort of really the color of neighborhoods, right, were shifting. We're starting to see many more white people moving into neighborhoods, a wealth in the city that really was what felt like it was breaking away from, just a kind of New York that had much more of a working class demographic. And obviously in that shift, people were losing their jobs. And as I mentioned earlier, I also was working full time at a domestic violence hotline. So I was kind of hearing these stories of economic crisis in the city from a number of angles. And again, through an ethnographic kind of project, I fell in with a group of people who were teaching themselves. They were going to a tarot school, essentially. They were going to night classes and learning to read tarot. And this was like one of those ethnographic things that you do. I went everywhere. I went all over the city. I've had tarot read. I've gone to seances and masses, and I've been all over It really was a long ethnographic process of trying to find what this world was of psychic talk in the city. But I did fall in with this group of people, and quickly what I realized is that people had lost their jobs, and they were turning to tarot as a way to put themselves back to work. For many people, this had been a kind of maybe even hidden passion, an interest, a sort of side, hobby that they like. They thought they were interested in the cards for a number of reasons, for spiritual practices, magical practices. They like the art of the cards. Some people get into this because they just love art history. But there was this kind of conversation happening in those night classes about good work and meaningful work and working for yourself, especially if you'd lost your job or been pushed out of the formal labor market, or you were working in retail and you didn't know what your schedule was going to be, and there was this kind of sense of precarious work, by which we mean work that isn't stable, work that isn't necessarily formal work. And as labor historians will sort of point out, precarious work is often the norm globally and historically, right? We've kind of known since the later half of the 20th century, we start to think about work as something that's formally contracted, has an employment relationship, maybe this kind of idea that there's even some kind of contract for life in certain jobs. It's going to come with benefits, and it's going to be stable, right? You're going to work your 9 to 5, or you're going to work da-da-da, and that's your life. Well, we know now from the last 30 years that kind of has been untangled for many, many people, and in many, many institutions and across different industries. So that, again, just to put the dissertation, this was 2008. I think it was starting to, dawn on a certain group of people that this precarity was coming for them as well. They had either experienced it by being pushed out, or they were kind of just on the edge of it. Were they really going to be able to turn this retail job or kind of office job into a life? And yet sitting over here is this little pack of cards that they love to talk, love to work with. Could that not be their job? Could they not do something with it in terms of building a media career, building a kind of writing career? Could they find a way of doing this as either a form of therapy or coaching? And could they not use the tarot literally? Sometimes in many cases, flipping cards, asking questions about what's the next job, what should I do, who should I network with, and really taking the tarot as a place of consulting about career choices. Could they not do that and shape a life that actually paid the bills but had a little bit more meaning to them? And so, I think now 2021, we're kind of farther down a conversation about precarity and entrepreneurialism and self-employment, and we see that there's a much larger structural issue, especially now in the wake of COVID. I wouldn't suggest to anyone, pull out your tarot cards and there you go. But in 2018, this was still a conversation. Was entrepreneurialism going to be a viable way to kind of put yourself back to work? Or should you go and actually look for that 9 to 5 job that may or may not be there for you anymore?
So that's a great account of precarity. And I was thinking about how in your abstract, it's There's also this concept of disenchantment, and I'm really interested as the soulless materialist of the title. I mean, this is kind of a joke because I got soul, right? But I'm curious to know how the concept of disenchantment in sociology comes in.
Yeah. Well, that's a much longer conversation about social theory and histories of bureaucracy and the modern state and the modern world, which, if you've read your social theory kind of 101, you'll have encountered Max Weber's work on capitalism and the sort of ethos of capitalism, and that this kind of, modernizing work ethos it pushes us into an iron cage of bureaucracy and rules and order, and the world becomes disenchanted. All of the kind of hauntings and ghosts and sort of magical bits of the pre-modern world are rationalized. That is a contested. You just got a very short capsule summary there of Marx. Obviously, this is a contested theory. This is a kind of idea that we teach students in Sociology 101, and yet then we encounter our world continually that is uncertain, risky, mysterious, potentially enchanted, and clearly, if there was supposed to be a kind of iron cage of bureaucracy, it never fully contained us. And I get that, I think this tarot bit and the nexus that it sits in is a really, clear example of a kind of world that people still want to be mysterious and open. And if anything, to come back to the precarity, in the actual sort of shifts there, structural and economic shifts in precarity, you do start to see a discourse around entrepreneurialism and transformation of the self and turning yourself into a subject who is always ready to go to work, always ready to find the next opportunity. And that kind of subject needs, to some degree, a certain level of uncertainty. It has to kind of keep finding the next thing. So what I was trying to argue in that dissertation about tarot was there's something in the card flip. There's something about the card flip that was matching up quite nicely with that need to find the next thing, that need to kind of plumb the depths of uncertainty and a bit of enchantment, right? That becomes a bit of an enchanting project when it works. If you can sit with a pack of cards and others, actually, people read tarot obviously for themselves, but this was often happening in a group setting with other people. If you can begin to flip a card and figure out how to make decisions and choices in that uncertainty, and those decisions and choices start to pay off, which is what had happened. I mean, it's New York City, right? People were starting to read tarot for people that were going to pay them several $100s an hour. People were getting book deals. People were getting the vision board, right? The sort of, the secret was working. So that connection, when it works, is a bit enchanting, right? It's like, ooh, something is mysterious. I'm plumbing it. I'm kind of learning its, occult rules. And here I am making things happen, right? I'm manifesting something. So this wasn't a whole argument about, how precarity brings back these forms of often problematic enchantment. Again, this is not my politics for everyone to flip a card and solve their work problems. I think we need organizing and deep political transformation. But you can see where I'm going with this, right? That somehow this rational cage, it got undone a bit by a kind of economics that has almost put many of us into situations where we literally have to use a compass to figure out what comes next.
In in the interview that I had earlier with Ula Ramchek, and we were talking about the kind of cottage industry aspect of tarot, he pointed out that you shouldn't sell yourself short, right? And it's like all of a sudden these folks are getting paid $100 an hour, right? And it kind of breaks you out of one of the traps, I think, of capitalism, which is thinking of that commoditized labor hour at minimum wage as being like your starting point and what you're worth or whatever. And it turns out that the way that we think about the labor hour, right, is really conditioned by the vicissitudes of the market and the kind of greedy structure of the bosses. A more cynical person might bring up that Onion article, right? Person with least amount of shit together is now offering tarot readings, right? And I'm thinking about, though, we appreciate materialist explanations, and I think enchantment, is all part of a materialist explanation here on the show. And I love the way that your work, and I'm wondering also, are you kind of pioneering and doing this work? Was it hard to sell a dissertation on tarot and sociology when you were working? I remember when I was a grad student around the same time, it was really hard to sell esoteric topics.
It's a good question. I had a very supportive committee. Again, there was an ethnographer, a cultural theorist, and an anthropologist on my dissertation committee. And I think they all saw the topic as being, yes, about tarot and a tarot school and tarot readers, but about, a certain type of cultural object, new markets. And then this, of course, what was kind of pioneering at the time was this push around labor, like bringing back a new type of digital labor, to say to people, it was harder to sell, I think, to a committee that there were really these problematic shifts happening in labor, and you had to go and look what was happening on Facebook, for example, to show these people what the labor of a tarot reader was. That was a harder sell. But I will also say, yeah, you probably have noticed that the dissertation has not become a book yet. I would like it to be in the next couple of years. But this isn't, if you say tarot to someone, they go, oh, yeah, hobby, art. It's seen as a kind of marginal topic. But when I say, well, this is a way in which people put themselves back to work in a shifting political economy, mostly through digital media, they go, oh, right. Now, especially if I say to someone, well, this is just an older form of gig work, and you can look at the way in which this labor is being platformed, and we should now consider this as a part of a kind of, project of self-employment and precarious labor, they pay a little more attention. So you're right, you're kind of, I think it's hard to position social studies of spirituality outside of the social study of religion. And that's probably where I had the most difficulty, because I was still doing this labor ethnography. And so being a little bit outside of the sub-discipline of religious studies, I think, is where I probably, made the most mistake. And if I were to write the book now, I think it would be about kind of reframing it within these histories of gig work and informal labor. So I wouldn't maybe lead with spirituality anymore. It's a thing that, yeah, I think those disciplines are still quite, I don't know what when you were doing your project, your own research and master's program, what was the discipline you were in?
Oh, I was working in a pretty loose and informal school and didn't really know what I was doing. I was in religious studies, but I was hanging out with the medieval philosophy folks and, trying to write about this Renaissance guy. And it was really hard to sell the esoteric stuff. So my advisor just didn't have a clue what I was talking about. It was wild.
It is hard because I think the esoteric stuff is fundamentally interdisciplinary a bit, but now, again, I would say we've both been doing some of this for 10 years, and I do see a resurgence of occult studies within religious studies, right? So from the theologians now, and also, just a kind of, I think the minute I left Brooklyn, there was the sort of blossoming of magic and witchcraft, and just it really has taken off. So I don't think we're talking at the fringes anymore.
Yeah,
right?
We're definitely on the map.
Yeah. So again, delighted to talk to you today, and I do hope kind of that the book comes back. I think this is a project that should come out in the next year or two. Yeah.
So I only want to ask, 20, 30 minutes of your time, if you're willing to stick around for another maybe 10.
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk some then about how your approach has evolved to thinking about gig labor?
Sure. Again, I think if I pick this thread up again in my research, I would start online fully. The dissertation, again, was born out of, walking and photographing and talking to people and trying to find different entry points into this kind of, I never knew fully who was reading tarot in New York City. It's an impossible map to make. You'll never know all the places that someone's reading a tarot card or, using a deck of cards. But I did give it my all as a kind of, embodied ethnographer to walk around and meet people. Well, now I would start from online spaces. I would absolutely go back and start using some digital methods to look at, esoteric social media, to look at the ways in which people have already. When I was studying people, they were just starting to blog and move on to Facebook. Um, they were writing books and making lots of media, but social media was still kind of, ooh, there was a whisper campaign. You should get on Facebook, right? And people were starting to teach each other how to use social media to build a business and also build a brand and to, again, put themselves back to work. Now that's kind of been established, right? There's networks of people. Their websites are beautiful and shiny. I see people tweeting about tarot kind of in a very mainstream way. It seems to be deeply popular among academics. It's deeply popular among professionals. It's mingled itself into a kind of self-help and wellness culture that I think, yeah, start online, absolutely, and go from there, and then begin to kind of do another ethnography, kind of a digital ethnography of the ways people are talking about tarot, but also making that into sort of turning that into a place that they're actually getting paid.
So let me ask then about the dark side that you've sort of hinted at, and you talk about your optimism, which is something we appreciate a lot on the show. But we're also haunted by this idea, right, that tarot is this form of counseling, but like mindfulness, are we just sort of kind of like putting a band-aid on capitalism as the tarot reader who is just sort of giving like medicine for the the capitalist who's stressed out, helping them get back on the job, helping them get, are we just reforming them as like a good capitalist subject, or is there a way that tarot can be a more revolutionary force where we're kind of rethinking the bourgeois subject?
I think you're going to always have a mixed bag there. I mean, I think it will be really hard to cut, a clear line between that. And that has to do, again, with the way, that where work sits in all of our lives. So yes, on the one hand, and there is a ton of that, I think, in kind of contemporary tarot work that is pretty uncritical, get back to work and be well and find your highest power and get the next, get the next dollar there. But there's also deep roots in tarot communities, deep roots of people, working people, and different. Actually, I think sometimes one of the projects that might need to happen in the world of tarot is a much deeper investigation of its own self as a community and its politics, its race politics, and its class politics, and its general sense. Because there's a lot of, I would say, there is revolutionary thought in these spaces. It's very under the radar. And actually, I think there's a bifurcation, which, again, I haven't studied this in a few years, but it would be worth checking out. You kind of have your old school tarot readers. They're not online, right? They are maybe being pushed there in some ways, but they're writers and they're art historians. And there's a kind of real deal economy, and then there's the people that come in and they're like, I do tarot and I, this is something I love and it's my passion project, and here I am gonna embrace digital media and get a number of followers and put myself on the scene. There's a bit of a tension there, of what the politics of tarot should be. Is it a kind of below the surface? You need, you need to know, you need to be in the know. You're kind of working in maybe even ceremonial magic traditions. You're working with totally different metaphysics. Or are you kind of the Oprah generation who's coming on in and you're going to put all those metaphysics to work? I don't think that's been resolved in the tarot community. I think you get a real mixed bag of what people, how they understand money, what they think they are worth, how they understand work. And if anything, what I was watching in the tarot school kind of push was, this school had lasted for many, many years, word of mouth, basically, right? These are great teachers. You need to go hang out with them. And they were being kind of pushed to a spiritual marketplace against their will. I write about that in one of my journal articles, is kind of pushed and pulled to the spiritual marketplace. Can you survive anymore if you're not online? Can you survive anymore if you're not networked? And yeah, you'll find the same traces of resistance and revolution along those conversations in tarot. I definitely think they are not resolved. But would be a fantastic project to kind of get in there. And I also think having Tarot World maybe reflect a bit on its, race, class, and gender issues would be amazing, because
Definitely.
there's some stuff going on in there that's just not great, right? And as new people come in, sometimes that is, made much more visible. And as new people come into tarot, there's going to have to be, I think, a conversation there about what is this? Who is this for?
Yeah, these esoteric spaces, these underground kind of economies, right? Like there's a kind of a dangerous form of solidarity there, a kind of shadowy form of solidarity that when you're going online, when you're doing this digital work, it's definitely problematic. So here on the show, I'm beginning to realize that tarot is already sort of a way of thinking like a sociologist, right? There's all these things that tarot readers are doing is when they flip their cards, so many of them are court cards, like how many princes are here, how many princesses are here, how many pages, or whatever. There's already a lot of kind of archetypes of work embedded into the cards, and I think about how in alchemy, alchemy is women's work. There's all kinds of like ideology of work already embedded in the alchemical tradition, which was getting synthesized in the 18th century. So here on the show, we asked the question, how can we make our readings more dialectical? And I wonder if you'd like to just leave us with some final thoughts to answer that question.
Yeah, that's a great, again, I'm not so from the perspective of readings, I'm not a tarot reader. But and I don't know I don't know if I know the answer to that question. I mean, I think tarot's strength is that it is so rich in it is a world of scholarship in and of itself. And I do think that it's bringing that richness, bringing that history of tarot, bringing the kind of philosophy, the long history, the complicated history of tarot into the present day. And I think tarot doesn't, like when you say make it more dialectical, I don't know that people know what the next chapter of tarot is. Does it stay as a kind of obscured object that kind of lives in the shadow of astrology, and it doesn't really get its due in certain, spiritual frameworks? Or does it resurge as a kind of new media, essentially? Does it always need to stay? There's a kind of argument, tarot became a book, it was a hidden book. It's, well, maybe there's a new chapter in terms of media for tarot, or the kind of histories that are the histories and sort of metaphysics that are buried in those cards transcend and turn into a new object. I mean, I don't know that people know where tarot is going, if that makes sense. And again, I haven't looked at this in a few years, so maybe I'm even behind the times. Like maybe we're starting to see lots of innovations in this. Maybe people are moving tarot into new media worlds. And you could probably tell me, I mean, what is sort of, where is tarot in the world right now?
Yeah, that's a question I'm going to be asking my guests in the future. Well, Dr. Karen Gregory, it's just been such a pleasure to have you on the show, and you've really put your finger directly on the pulse of a lot of our concerns. And I'm just going to leave us with this idea, right? Is the great work spoken of by occultists through the ages really the work of resisting, the multi-generational work of resisting capitalism?
Yeah, I love it.
I hope we'll have a chance to speak again, and you have yourself a great week.
You too, Ted. It was wonderful to speak with you and to meet you.
Yeah.
And best of luck with the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.